In today's episode, we are joined by the great Dr. Jason Cohen, a board certified thyroid surgeon, founder of the Surgery Group LA, a leading educator in medicine through at The Thyroid Guy, and most importantly, the best girl dad that I've ever met. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Cohen.
Thanks, Sammy. Love to see you. Love to reconnect right here.
Yeah, it's great to hear from you. So, for those viewing who may not follow you on social media just yet, who is the Thyroid Guy? Who is Dr. Jason Cohen? How did you start that account? And how has it changed the way that you practice medicine?
Wow, that's a huge question. We could spend the entire podcast talking about that. I don't even know who I am. I think that's something we should all be doing, is still becoming and still evolving and still pivoting and all that. But to answer the whole Thyroid Guy thing, believe it or not, I've been doing social media for a while. In terms of being a doctor, and I've been doing the podcast as well, the Gross Anatomy podcast that you didn't even mention. Maybe it's like too taboo or something to mention, but.
I was going
Uh,
to follow up. Yeah.
uh, but I've been doing social media for like a couple of years before COVID even. So it's
Mhm.
about maybe 7 or 8 years. The reason I started the thyroid, I have a few different social media accounts. The reason I started the Thyroid Guy social media is the hospital that I'm based out of is a super, super competitive hospital. And I'm a private practice guy as opposed to a guy who's paid by and employed by the hospital. And there's a lot of competition. And one of my concerns was the hospital where I'm at spends a fortune on their own marketing for their own people. Yet I'm at that hospital not getting any of the benefits. So I kind of said to myself, how do I distinguish myself? And, in the day of social media and TikTok and all that stuff, I said to myself, Instagram may be a good idea to kind of try to distinguish myself, get myself out there. I love to do thyroid and parathyroid surgery, so why not start this social media account? And it actually started, I was at an endocrine surgery meeting, which is an annual meeting, which, believe it or not, I'm about to head to. The annual meeting's coming up next weekend. So it's the anniversary almost of me starting the Thyroid Guy. While I was at that meeting, I had the epiphany, hey, I need to do this. So happy anniversary to me.
Happy anniversary. And did you start the gross anatomy at the same time as that, or was that something that came a bit later?
I'm trying to remember exactly. So I also, a probably similar time, around the same time, I'm a big movie, TV, pop culture fan. I love movies, and I live in LA. Every reference, everything I do is always tied to some kind of movie, TV show, music, song, something like that. And my kids and friends and family would always ask me stuff. Hey, I saw this in the news. Or my buddies, even your dad. Hey, I saw this. Is this real? Is this true? Does this really happen? And I'm like, that would be a cool, fun podcast to kind of tie in all that stuff to medicine. So Gross Anatomy Podcast is where we explore the sight, smells, sounds of medicine, how it relates to movies, TV, books, pop culture, and the world around us, and podcasts. So it probably started around the same time.
Great. And yeah, for those of you that don't know, it's a great educational channel. And if you want to hear more about it, just go follow him at the Thyroid Guy and at Gross Anatomy Podcast.
The truth about the Thyroid Guy might be somewhat educational for thyroid and parathyroid, but Gross Anatomy is more like silly, fun, me kind of just riffing and having a good time a little bit. There's some educational stuff there too, but not so much about medicine. Maybe mentoring, maybe mentorship.
You mentioned also that creative mind that you've got, and I wanted to speak about backtracking to your undergraduate days when you were an art major. How did your passion for art help you relax through some of those transitional periods, like going to medical school, getting through residency, starting your own practice? You've got a lot of paintings around you, and is that something that is relaxing for you? And how does art play a role in your life?
You know, the interesting thing about, for me, making art or doing art is that the process itself, and unfortunately I don't really get to do much of that anymore. That's kind of where the podcast comes in. That's kind of my creative outlet a little bit. But the whole making art thing wasn't in itself relaxing. It wasn't, it was definitely using a different part of my brain and having fun and doing a different thing. but I also always found making art kind of work. And some people are like, yeah, when I do art, I'm just relaxed and in the zone. And for me, art wasn't like that. I loved it as an outlet, but going to art, looking at art, talking about art, going to movies, going to theater, appreciating art, that definitely for me was a great outlet. And also being an art major in college while being pre-med was really a fun, nice balance. You know, it wasn't just focused on medicine, 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 medicine. It was, yeah, I'm doing all my prereqs, but I'm also kind of having a good time and having fun and exploring and not just stuck in one path.
Yeah. And do you have any recommendations for around like the LA area, some of the good art museums? Because I know they have a lot of cool like natural history museums there as well. Or do you have some favorite ones to go to in that area?
You know, it's such a darn shame, Sammy. I don't get out much anymore. I haven't been to an art museum in a long time. You know, I'd go with the kids, but I haven't actually been. But the Broad, you know, is a pretty well known one. The Getty, but the reality is, I haven't gotten out to see art in a long time. What really excites me sometimes is when I'll meet, like in different scenarios, other artists or young artists, and they'll show me their work. You know, whether it's
Hmm.
patrons or people I meet along the way. That's kind of fun for me too. Is just to see. And I'm lucky. My youngest Izzy, who you know is an art major, and her art is very different from mine, very hyper real, and so I love looking at her art and seeing her growth and seeing what she's working on. And every now and then, she and I get to do some art together, which is a super treat for me when that happens.
Yeah, I bet. I know you've taken up hot yoga recently. Has that helped you with your mind and like, when you're in the operating room, do you find that there are any ways that it's like changed your outlook on life? Because I know that just as much of a physical activity, it's just as much of a mental activity when you're doing that yoga. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I grew up in New York with your dad. Yoga back then to me was this weird, wacky thing. There was this show, I'm dating myself, called, now I'm blanking on the name. What was it called? That's Amazing. It was called That's Amazing or something. And they had weird, wacky stuff. And I remember they had this guy, this Yogi Kudu, who, this skinny guy basically in a diaper, it looked like. And he folded himself up into this box, the see-through clear box, and they put him in a pool underwater, and he didn't die. Like pre-David Blaine stuff like that. And to me, that was what yoga was. Like I had no idea. I'm like, that's yoga. It's this weird, wacky thing, and never in a million years would I have ever considered doing yoga or anything. It just was weird. And my sister became a yoga instructor. My older sister Stephanie is a yoga instructor, and I still never thought, never entertained doing yoga. And then, sure enough, my eldest daughter, this is a long version of the story, Sammy. My eldest daughter, Liat, started taking up hot yoga. And she would say, Dad, you got to come, you got to come. Even our accountant goes, our accountant's at the yoga class. I see all these people there. And I was like, no, I'm not going. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to. And then finally, my wife, Bernice, went with Liat a couple times. And she's like, Jay, this is great. I love this. You got to come. And to be a good husband years ago, I really no other reason, just to try to be a good husband, I went with her to a class, and I was hooked. And I think I actually like it more than she does now. Like she likes the workout aspect of it, but I like going to the classes that are more yoga based. And the reason I like it so much is like you're alluding to. I like the challenge of challenging my physical body to try to get into better shape, be able to assume better poses, do challenging poses. But I love that mind body thing where you're kind of like, stuff's going around me, but let me just feel inward and not kind of stress about what else is going on, and kind of try to have that yoga mentality of just being and just flowing and just putting things outside distractions away. And at the same time, as a surgeon, we're standing up for hours potentially, cranked, looking up in weird places, working. And I find having done yoga, my posture is better. I'm able to kind of sustain. My back doesn't hurt as much necessarily after doing a hard, tough case. And even just standing still sometimes, I feel like yoga's got me aligned better to some degree. I've even gotten to the point where I'll tell patients that, I think they should consider yoga for just so many reasons, mind, body, and then the core, which is super important for your back and everything like that.
And continuing with that theme of like health and wellness, you're also a vegan. Do you want to tell us why you started that and how long you've been doing it, and what are some of the changes that you've noticed for yourself in that diet?
Yeah. Also, same thing about me growing up in New York. I grew up at, typical New Yorker, meat eating, carnivore, big picture, not super healthy. And being a vegan was the weirdest thing in the world. And sure enough, I joke around that I've now become the weird LA guy. I do yoga, I strive to be plant-based, and I try not to say I'm a vegan. Even though I think being a vegan is great, I try to say more than anything, I strive to be a vegan, or I strive to be as plant-based as possible. People love labels. I hate labels. I think it isolates us and it separates us. And then people are always looking to hate. If you say I'm a vegan and then someone sees you eating cheese one day, they're like, you're a vegan, and they want to hate you. So I think it's so much more important to strive for things rather than give ourselves absolutes. So I strive to be as plant-based as possible. And one of the reasons is I love pizza. So every now and then, after Passover, the one thing I couldn't wait is to have a good slice of pizza. So, yesterday evening I went out for, good New York style pizza with Liad actually, to satisfy my pizza crave. But so years ago, it was easy because Bernice, my wife, was always kind of pescatarian. So in the beginning, I'd eat meat, but she wouldn't. And I was always kosher too. So there was always this balance of, if I wanted to eat meat in my marriage, we'd either have to go to a kosher restaurant or I'd have to go get a kosher steak or whatever and cook it. So that was kind of natural to eat less meat. But then I had this kind of health epiphany maybe 10 to 15 years ago. I don't remember exactly how long, where I looked around at the people who I thought were really successful around me, friends, acquaintances, and it's not just about being vegan, but it's about the people who I felt were really successful really took care of themselves more than, they really focused on their own health. They saw the whole big picture. They took care of themselves and they worked hard and they did everything. So I had that epiphany that it's time to start taking care of myself. But then I read this book. I'm giving long answers. I read this book called, a friend of mine told me about this book called The China Study, which is a very boring book and just repeats the same thing over and over again. But at the end of the day, the lesson, the study of that book is that there definitely are health benefits from an inflammation standpoint and a heart cardiac risk standpoint for being plant-based, for having a vegan plant-based diet. And it just spoke to me. And I knew, as we all know, that we, unfortunately or fortunately, we all have expiration dates and something's coming for all of us. And I kind of figured, we know that maybe I can help either put it off a little bit longer, or if and when that thing comes, maybe I could be better prepared for it. And already I had not been eating that much meat, so why not try to be plant-based and strive for that? And so it was kind of that slow process of just overall wellness. In our house, we basically live at a zoo with all of our animals. So I've become this weird animal fan, where I don't even like killing insects, which is pathetic and weird, maybe mosquitoes and ants, but other than that, so it's like this whole evolution of me being this LA guy.
Are there other like things that you have been trying to teach your daughters as they're going through a similar journey that you've gone through, going to vet school, to still prioritize your mental health and your physical health, because it's a tough road and a long road, and sometimes you can get lost and not prioritize yourself at times as well. And so, what are some of the things that you teach them and that you could teach to other people going through similar things?
For sure. One thing, probably, as you know, uh, too, with your folks is when your folks tell you to do something, you want to do the opposite, right? And you get annoyed and you get kind of, why are you telling me this? So there's a fine line between trying to tell them things. So I really try more than anything to be an example. I'll like text them that I did a workout, or I'll to kind of just show that I'm making this a part of my life every day, or trying to make it a part of my life every day. And I tell patients that too, is that I really think it's important to try to move, do exercise, do activity daily. And as you know, also we all kind of cook together for Shabbat. We all are in the kitchen together cooking. I try, rather than to tell and instruct, although I do that too plenty of times, but I know it's often met with resistance. I'm sure when your parents tell you stuff, you're like, no. So I really try to do it more by demonstrating as much as I can, rather than pushing and forcing. And every now and then I'll also say, why don't you go do workout? But I'd rather say, hey, I did a hot yoga class today. It was amazing, rather than say, when I'm calling them and they're like just laying in their dorm room, rather than say, go exercise. Another thing I also try to tell, and I think I've told you this, and I tell our pre-med students this too, is um, when you're pre-med, you're really, or pre-vet or whatever it is, it's a hard and intense path and road, and you're kind of have this tunnel vision very commonly to want to get to that goalpost, get to that end zone or whatever it is. And one of my big regrets, believe it or not, is even though I was an art major, I never took any time off. I went right to college, right to med school, right to residency, right to fellowship, right into practice, and I never took any time off. I was lucky that during med school I was able to do a 2-month away elective in Africa, which was great. But one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't slow down and didn't do a gap year and didn't go abroad and didn't do any of that stuff. So that's another thing I tell my kids and students. Don't worry, and because both of my kids are going through it right now, about, they're both very concerned about that end zone, that end game. And I said, it doesn't matter. Everybody has a different path. It's okay if it takes you 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. If that's what you really want to do, but go and get experiences, and everything you do, even if it's like going off to surf for 6 months in Kauai, as long as you could write that into your story. Admissions committees, doctors, who, when you're applying for a job, they just want to hear that you have this cool, interesting story that helps build up you, that helps make you who you're going to be. So as long as you could tell a great story, I love the waves, I love the ocean, I love nature, and it was really important for me to kind of spend some time out there in nature and be in touch with the world and rhythms of the world. People love that. That's what's, as long as you're not saying, yeah, I wanted to go smoke pot for 6 months and just do nothing. It's how you paint your story. It's how you give your story. And I think that's what's important.
Yeah, and I think that's like you said, one of the things that many people get caught up in is that resume of just having this, and that, rather than having something that flows that can tell who you are as a person, and that's a really important thing.
As you remember meeting Dr. Clapper in the pre-med program, who's this amazing, who's one of my favorite people, and we bonded just because we have a lot of similarities, he and I, but we actually haven't spent that much time together, but we have such a love for each other. He spoke to our students, and you were in the group of students, saying, embrace the arts, because getting back to your earlier question, because I think that really helps anybody just see the world differently, see things differently, appreciate things differently. It helps you connect to people better. It might ground you better. It opens up your eyes to things. and it makes you better rounded. And then when you're meeting and talking to patients, you'll be able to talk to them and connect with them on a different level.
Hmm. And did you guys ever exchange art with each other and kind of talk about each of your pieces?
I don't. I've seen some of his art. I don't even think he's ever seen my art. But one of my highlights was I did have him a long time ago as a guest on the podcast early on, and that was just fantastic. So having him as a guest on the podcast was great. And when you saw him at the pre-med program, I think that might have been his second time as a guest to the pre-med. We may have had him one more time. So his journey, I don't think he talked about his journey as much at when you were in the cohort, but his journey is a pretty cool and interesting journey as well.
And to continue with those experiences that you've gone through in your life, I wanted to go back to the Africa trip. What were some of the things that you learned there, and what were some of the other experiences along the way that you feel like shaped the way that you practice medicine now?
The med school I went to downstate, State University of New York in Brooklyn, downstate, had, and I'm sure a lot of schools have it at this point, but back then I don't think a ton of med schools had it. This is a long time ago. This preventive medicine department that had these amazing opportunities to do these overseas electives in different hospitals throughout the world. So I was able to go spend 2 months in Kenya, in Kikuyu, Kenya, which is a village about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Nairobi. And I worked at this mission hospital as basically like a junior doctor, a sub-intern basically, getting to do a ton of stuff that one wouldn't get to do. Like I was we were doing open prostates for people with big prostates who couldn't, men with big prostates who couldn't go to the bathroom. And it was the craziest operation. The surgeon there was like, Jason, put your hand in and just scoop out the prostate. And then we basically put a catheter in to kind of have the bladder stick back down so that it would attach. Like it was so primitive, but I guess years ago that's how it was done. And so the experience I got to do and see in terms of and delivering babies and doing C-sections, kind of me doing the C-section, being assisted by these guys was just fantastic. One of the things that really still interests me is infectious disease. I think infectious disease is really cool. The exotic infectious disease, the worms and the parasites. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go. I wanted to see crazy, wacky infectious diseases. The interesting thing is I didn't see any really crazy, wacky infectious diseases. We saw a lot of typhoid, a lot of malaria, which was cool, and a lot of HIV. I still remember this patient that came in to the clinic, and he had on this hood. He was hooded, and he kind of looked like a character from Star Wars, like a Darth Maul or something. He was hooded, and you couldn't even see. Maybe you could just see his nose sticking out from under this hood, and because he was embarrassed about how he looked. And when he finally got into our clinic, he took off the hood, and his entire body was covered with these tumors, and we didn't know what it was, so we wound up scheduling him to take him to the OR, and we took one off to biopsy. And I remember Makone was the surgeon, and he's like, Makone's like, it's HIV, it's AIDS, and sure enough, he was right. What the tumor was something called Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a type of cancer, skin cancer, seen in patients potentially with bad AIDS, full-blown AIDS. And it's very rare. And this patient had very advanced AIDS, I guess, untreated, undiagnosed. We rarely see anything like that these days. But it was just a crazy, interesting presentation of AIDS. And then we had to tell him in the clinic after surgery, once we got the diagnosis back, yeah, sorry, sir, you have AIDS. And another patient I remember came in super sick. Heart was racing and just was sick. And we didn't know what was going on with the guy. And his family was around and he was sick. And within a few hours, he eventually died. And while we're taking care of him, we couldn't figure out what was going on with him. And he was awake for part of it. And then he was on oxygen for part of it. And I had the doctor there kind of helping me, but I was the main person taking care of him, and we couldn't for the life of us figure out what was going on. And they knew that I was hurting and struggling to try to figure out, and I felt terribly. And they knew, they could see how bad and how much anguish I had that I couldn't help him. And all they were doing was consoling me and grateful that I was just trying to help him and take care of him and make him comfortable. And they cared more about my well-being and even the patient was just so appreciative. And it's such a difference, in US or other world healthcare compared to third world healthcare. If that had happened, in LA, I'm sure a few days later I would have been hearing from their lawyers about, a lawsuit kind of thing. Why didn't I say? Whereas there, they were just so grateful that here I was trying to help this guy and take care of this guy. After the fact, I was looking it up. I think he had some kind of what's called organophosphate poisoning. I think it was like a pesticide poisoning, maybe exposure kind of thing that might have done him in. That was kind of my guess after we lost him, because he died within a very short period of time.
Wow. Those are some crazy stories. And going back to your origins back at Downstate, what was it like doing your medical school in New York City at a great hospital like they have at Downstate, and doing your residency training as well, then doing kind of a complete 180, going all the way across the country to LA, Cedar Sinai? What was the culture change like?
It was a major culture change. It really was. And today I'm not sure how much it would be. It probably still is. There's still a difference in East Coast, West Coast training, I think, a little bit. Certainly in the olden days, the East Coast was kind of what they would call more malignant, would be the word, or a harder type of training, where they would really kick the crap out of you and grill you. And it was always kinder and gentler on the West Coast. I think overall, in general, everything's kind of gotten kinder and gentler in general, but I still think there's a little bit harder core, although I could be wrong because I've been out of it for so long, but I think it's still a little harder core on the East Coast. But I don't know for sure. There's so many rules and regulations and restrictions and things. But back then, we were just starting with the electronic medical record and computerized things. So during med school and residency at Downstate at Kings County, if a patient needed blood drawn and lab results, the phlebotomy team, the blood drawing team, was me. I was the one, as the med student or the resident, who went and drew the blood. If the patient needed an IV, the IV team was me. I would go and draw and put in the IV. If the patient needed to be transported down for a CAT scan or some kind of scan, guess who patient transport was? Me. So it was everything and anything that needed to be done. You'd kind of have some help. There were some ancillary staff, but for the most part, it was me. And if you needed the results of the labs back, at 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning for rounds, you didn't log into the computer. You ran to the other building where the lab was. You took the paper slips. You were supposed to transcribe it, but I decided I would just steal the slips because they had a second copy, and I would bring it back to the intensive care unit and then I would write it on our papers so we could have it to round. That was how it was in med school and residency. Whereas as soon as I got to the West Coast, I still remember early on in my fellowship, one weekend, the nurses called me and said, Dr. Cohen, we can't get an IV on our patient. And we're going to call the IV team, but they're having a tough time too. And I'm like, I'll be right there. And they were like, what? I'm like, no, I'll be right there. And I remember I was probably in the Marina Del Rey, at least a half hour, 45 minutes from the hospital. They're like, what? And I show up, an hour, 45 minutes later. I put in the IV, and they thought I was crazy. They're like, nobody does this, And so in the beginning, I definitely felt like a bull in a china shop. I've certainly, it's been 26 years. I've acclimated now, but it definitely was a culture shock for sure.
Yeah, what are some of the biggest things that you miss from New York?
In terms of medicine or just New York in general?
Anything, anything.
I miss my youth. I miss my youth of New York. I was very lucky. I grew up with this group of guys, your dad included, who were my brothers. And we were, at different periods, we were anywhere between 14 to 20 of us. And so during med school or during residency, and everybody pretty much stayed in New York, in the city. So I remember, and I was in Brooklyn, if I had the chance, I would drive over the bridge and meet my buddies, at a bar or a restaurant for a little bit at night, and then, head back into Brooklyn. And I miss being able to kind of go and just hang with the boys, and on weekends certainly, Shabbat dinners and Shabbat lunches and all of that stuff.
No mention of pizza, I see. That's surprising.
Pizza, of course, but
Yeah.
I was also the house growing. I was the house growing up that all of the guys would gather in. So it was, as a kid, it was great. Every Shabbat, every Shabbos, not every, but many, at least once a month, if not 2 or 3 times a month, my house was packed with all the guys for Shabbat, and we'd just have an amazing Friday night Shabbat dinner with my mom cooking, all hanging out, and then we'd hang out on Saturday, or they'd come in Saturday night after Shabbos, and we'd all go out and then come back to my house and eat leftovers, and they'd all stay over, and those were good times.
Yeah, for sure. And continuing with that, what does like being a Jewish doctor mean to you? I know you're mentioning Shabbat as a central theme in your life for your family and your friends. Um, what does that, yeah, what does that mean to you being a Jewish doctor? How did it affect you when you were learning, and now when you're practicing? How do you incorporate some of those Jewish principles into your practice?
Yeah. So my level of religion has gone up and down over the years, but Judaism's always been, I grew up going to Ramaz, modern Orthodox Jewish day school in New York City, and I've been lucky. I've always had this really good Jewish support, whether it's with the family, with my friends. So it's always been a major part of my life. And then being at Cedar Sinai, which is an amazing, you pull up to the hospital and there's a huge Jewish star on the hospital. And every single room in the hospital has a mezuzah, which is just amazing. Whereas I went to Kings County downstate, and a lot of our hospitals were St. Vincent's and St. this and St. that, where there were crosses and Jesus there. So it's automatically part of my daily life, just having a mezuzah, and our office. Every door has a mezuzah. So just it's there, it's around us, which is pretty fantastic. But after October 7th, I was never someone to wear jewelry. I'm not a jewelry guy. But after October 7th, I a big reason is my wife. My wife is a very big Zionist. I hope it's okay to say that, and a very big advocate for Judaism and Jews. And after October 7th, my wife bought me this Jewish star, and I wear it, and I wear it out. It's never under my clothes, and I feel now more than ever, because I'm scared, because I'm afraid of how things are and how things are getting. I think now more than ever, we have to kind of wear our Judaism and our love for Israel out there, and not take any crap. And it's scary, but I think because I'm scared, I think it's important now to own it and wear it and be proud of it.
That's really aligns with, you know, these are things that should be able to be said. Being a Zionist is not a crime, and that is what AJMA is about. And having pride in being Jewish, that is the biggest thing, and that's the best way to fight anti-Semitism, with positivity and pride. And so that's beautiful that that's become even more of a central theme in your life, with something bad turning it into something good.
Yeah.
And segueing onto something a little bit more lighthearted, this podcast would not be complete without acknowledging the massive amount that you've given back with your pre-med program. And before I give, my perspective, because I can speak about it and it's amazing, but I want to hear from you how that came about, and how important that is for you in your professional career.
So when I started at Cedars-Sinai 26 years ago as a fellow and as a cancer surgery fellow, surgical oncology fellow, I met the head of the volunteer department at Cedars-Sinai, which is a huge volunteer department, a woman named Barbara Leannes, back then was running the volunteer department. And I met them and developed a relationship with the volunteer department, with her. And to some degree, she was and is a mentor to me. She early on said to me one day, she said, "Hey, Jason, we have this, there's a student, a college student who's interested in being a doctor. He's the son of someone at Cedars' friend, a friend of someone who works at Cedars. Could you let him shadow you in the office?" And I was like, "Sure." Yeah, and back then, 26 years ago, before so many rules and regulations, it was so much easier to get people into the hospital. It was much easier to kind of have a student come in and shadow. Even into the OR, there was much less hoops to jump through. I had this student shadow me for a long time. Interestingly, that student became a lawyer. Didn't become a doctor. But after that student, it grew. Then someone else found out about it, and she would keep saying to me, "Hey, I have this other student. Would you let them shadow?" And word of mouth got out, and it grew to be this, like, every year I'd have like tons of students come to the OR, come to the office, hang out with me. And then in the anesthesia department, there was an anesthesiologist, a really good guy who ran the anesthesia department, who also started taking students through it was always through the volunteer office. I don't know why or how, it started because of that one guy. But always I would say to Barbara, this is great having these students shadow, but I would always say to her, I think it should be a formal program. I think it'd be really cool if we had this formal, structured program. And she always would be like, yeah, no, which is something my mom always said. Yeah, no. She'd always be like, yeah, oh, yeah. And I thought she would just blow me off. And then a few years later, because the rules and the regulations at the hospital started increasing and scrutiny started increasing, and more doctors wanted to have students and they weren't letting them. And then they would say, "But Jason Cohen has students." Eventually, it just shut down. That whole thing shut down, and they said, "Okay, no one could have students anymore." And then a year or two passed, and Barbara realized, it's a shame that this whole program disappeared. And she called me up about 12 years ago, I think now, saying, "Jason, you know how you said it would be great if it was a formal program for pre-med students?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay, are you ready to do it? We're gonna create a program. Are you ready to run it?" And she dared me to put my money where my mouth is, and I said, "Okay." And she and I and her assistant director, a guy named Casey McGuire, who's a great guy, who's no longer alive, unfortunately. He was a great guy. He went on to run the department for a little while too. The three of us took maybe 6 months to a year to jump through the hoops and the rules and the regulations and corporate compliance and the legal team and all of that, and we set up the program. And it's been going, I think 10 plus years now that we've been doing this program. We run 3 sessions at a time. And one of the reasons why it always kind of spoke to me and I like doing it, there's several reasons, but one is I never had anything like that. I still to this day say that I don't feel like I ever had a mentor, certainly not when I was younger. Maybe Barbara to some degree was a mentor, but not a doctor mentor. And one of my partners, Leo Gordon, who I think you've met a little bit, was a mentor too. But I don't feel like I ever had a mentor in terms of the whole journey. So I wanted to create that for students who don't have that, who don't have mentorship. And I never shadowed. I never spent any time in a hospital. I never spent any time with a doctor. For me, it was just, I was always going to be a doctor, and that was that. So I just felt that, wow, this would be a great thing. The other thing that I like about it is, as much as I love what I'm doing, as much as I love thyroid and parathyroid surgery, as much as I love being in the operating room, being with students, pre-med students, kind of reminds me of what's great about medicine and what's fun about medicine and what's fun about the journey and learning and the excitement. So it kind of reinvigorates me a little bit and re-excites me about what I do. So it's kind of a combination of those things. Plus I get to have these amazing interactions with students and doctors. So that's kind of why we are where we are.
So I did this program over the summer, and my favorite parts about it was first of all the e-journal, because now I have that stuff to look back on for the rest of my life, um, and
I got
it'll take me back.
That's amazing. I'm so happy to hear that because I've never heard a student, because we make the students after they shadow, each
Yeah,
time they shadow, we make the students do a quick little e-journal about what they saw that day. I have never, and we've been doing again 10 years, three sessions, three cohorts a year. So, over 1,000 students probably at this point in time. I have never once heard a student say they like the e-journal, they're grateful for the e-journal. So thank you, Sammy. That lets me know that it's not a complete torture for the students. Thank you. That I've never
yeah.
first person to say anything like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say at the time it could be annoying after a long day to do something like that. But yeah, for sure, looking back on it, because you're not going to remember every minute detail of everything you did there. But with those pages of journaling that we did, it gave us just glimpses and to kind of refresh your memory on what was so special about that experience. Uh, and the other thing was it was great to see different specialties each week, and understand both what led them there, and why they continue to do what they do, and how they love what they're doing every day. And with each speaker, you could see how much passion they had, not just in medicine, but in that particular field. And there were experiences where they found that thing that they just loved, and it was just beautiful to hear because it gives us pre-med students that continued hope that there's something that you're working towards at the end, and remembering that the process is just as important, and those experiences that you get along the way will shape you, and you don't know when those will come. And with each person, they had different stories and different times where they had more obstacles along the way or less in different ways. Each one of them encountered many hardships that shaped them into the doctors that they were. And that was really great to hear from them. Before we end, I also wanted to include like a little bit more of like a, you know, uh, like personable segment a little bit, because we did spend the entire summer together, and I'm not 100% sure if this will end up being in the podcast. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of shift this more over to this experience that we had over the summer, and I was able to spend 10 weeks with you, and get to be welcomed by your amazing family. And so, what was it like having another like son, I guess, in the household, in a way, for that summer? I know it was definitely. I've never had any sisters, and the two that I gained over the summer, it was an amazing experience. And yeah, so what was that like?
It was funny. I would walk into the dining kitchen living room area, and there'd be this person sitting with these huge headphones on, and I'd start trying to have a conversation with that person, and they would just be ignoring me. And that was you with these amazing soundproof headphones and I'd have to yell, I'd have to be like, Sammy, in order to get you to hear me. It was hysterical. I never watched as much MMA fighting in my life as I did this summer. But I got to tell you, I loved it. For many reasons, I loved it. Also, I've never had a son, although I do have a son-in-law. I've never had a son, and it was great having you around. And actually, one of my big regrets in life is that I moved to the West Coast. All my other buddies are on the East Coast, and all the guys, your dad, you guys are in Florida, were in New York. One of my regrets is that our families never got to all hang out, and our kids never got to meet each other. So it was a big treat having you there, actually. And then your parents came out to stay for a little bit too. So it was really a big treat for me. I've always fantasized about us all as a group of all of our guys and kids. And I would always pitch it every few years to the guys, believe it or not. And all of them would be like, no, I don't want to hang out with our families. It's just a guys trip. And I'd always be like, let's do a family trip. And no one ever said yes. So it was a nice treat for me to have you there. And I loved it.
Yeah, I do think that might be in the future. I think more and more the guys' families are meeting each other with like weddings and other great celebrations. So hopefully that'll be in the future. So you mentioned your gross anatomy podcast where you go through a lot of entertainment and I know you're a big TV guy and movie guy. What are your top three movies? Both maybe three normal, and then what are like some of those like medical shows? I know everyone's raving about The Pit now. There's Grey's Anatomy, all of those. So what are your top three medical shows, and then what are your top three movies? Because I know you love your cinema.
Yeah. Um, well, the cliche answer of top movie is, the Godfather series, one and two, not three, which are amazing classic movies. But I love coming of age movies. That I'm really into those. And did I ever give you homework in terms of movies to watch? Did you do your homework?
Mr. Ripley, I did watch it.
Townsend
Yeah,
Mitchell. That's a
the
good one. Yeah.
Falcon
But I
Whisperer.
feel like I gave you other homework too.
There was one other one that
You didn't like it, right?
Izzy told me that I shouldn't watch it and that
What
I'll
movie?
definitely not like it. So
What movie?
I
Which was
took her
that?
advice. Um, it was it was the one about some coming of age love story with it's a famous one. I don't know. I'll try to find it and send it to you. Maybe I'll watch it. Maybe. But
So one of the coming of age movies that I really love is Almost Famous. Have you seen that one? Did you
I
watch that?
think that was the one that you said.
Yeah.
I
And,
believe so.
so I still recommend it. I think you should watch it, especially if you like music. Um, it's just this great coming of age story about a young kid who wants to be a reporter for Rolling Stone magazine, for music, and he winds up, and he's a young kid, he's a high school kid, and he winds up going on tour with a band, and it's about his journey, and it's really one of my favorite. The music in it is great, just the it's just a fun. Young Kate Hudson is in it, and she's gorgeous in it. So Almost Famous. I'd love for you to watch it. I'd love to hear your feedback. And that's a movie I really love. But then there's so many other movies that like for me as a kid, I still remember when I saw West Side Story as a movie, which is a musical, and I'm a total cheeseball. I admit it. That was just gorgeous. The music, the love story, the dance just spoke to me. And so West Side Story, I think, and it's an amazing play too. And then it was redone by Spielberg not that long ago, and and that was a pretty decent version of it too. Was West Side Story. So I mean, if you like musicals at all, I would definitely recommend West Side Story. So those are three that just popped into my head right now. I mean, there are a zillion other ones, but
Hmm.
I mean, anything with Marlon Brando, I think is amazing. Whether it's On the Waterfront, which is an amazing old black and white movie. Um, and I actually got to meet Eva Marie Saint. When she was older, she was the female lead in On the Waterfront. Um, and then Diner is a classic. I don't know if that's like one of the greats, but and then in terms of TV shows, the interesting thing is, as a kid, the medical TV show that I watched was a show called Saint Elsewhere. And I blame that show on me wanting to become a doctor to some degree. That was kind of the show that made me think about, I always thought I'd be a doctor, and it was always my interest. I loved all that stuff. But then watching Saint Elsewhere, and I would watch it with my mom, and it came out once a week, so you'd watch it once a week. Watching that show, I really like that show. And the actors in that show are Howie Mandel, who's famous. He's the host of one of those reality shows. I forget which one. Denzel Washington, young Denzel Washington, played the young hotshot surgeon. And there were some other people, well-known actors, were on that show too. And that was really a great kind of like what would it be likened to these days? Maybe a little bit like, it was about like a down on its hard poor hospital, barely struggling to make ends meet, and these doctors working kind of like a pre-Grey's Anatomy, but Grey's Anatomy is much more soap opera-y sex kind of thing than St. Elsewhere. But that was a big medical show that I really liked. There was a medical movie that I thought was interesting, I think called Article 99 or Project 99. I don't totally remember. And it was with Ray Liotta, who was from Goodfellas. Ray Liotta from Goodfellas played this young doctor, and it seemed like it was loosely based on this book, House of God. Have you heard of or read House of God?
I don't think so.
I
No.
recommend you read House of God. It's a little dated, but anyone who went into medicine in my day knew House of God, because it was about this hospital and these residents going through internship and residency in this hospital. It's super dated. So everything that's talked about and said in that hospital would not fly today. Everybody would have been arrested and kicked out of the hospital because of how DEI and all that stuff is today, and being proper and all that. But House of God was kind of like the it book, if you were going into medicine. So this movie, Article 99, was kind of like House of God. But fun fact, the guy who wrote House of God, a guy named Sam Shem, we actually had him on the podcast right around the start of COVID, which was a real treat for me to get a chance to interview him and talk to him. So check out that episode. But I would definitely read House of God. Even though it's dated, it's a fun, interesting read.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. It seems pretty cool actually.
Yeah, and it's
And
really
then I don't think I don't think Almost Famous is the one that you were mentioning, but that plot sounds really cool. And then Saint Elsewhere, how many seasons is Saint Elsewhere?
a lot. It was out for a
Okay.
while. I mean, I think at least 5 seasons, but I have no clue. But it was out there for a long time, said elsewhere.
And
It's
what about it made you like feel like this is what I'm gonna be doing and this is gonna be great?
all the doctors had heart. They all were struggling to. All the docs were just trying to be good doctors, and that was what the show was about. Despite all the ups and the downs and the hardships and challenging life, balancing life and friendships, and so I really liked how they all tried to. That spoke to me, just despite all the adversity and having no money to run this hospital, they all were, what I would tell my residents back in the day at downstate in Kings County. Sometimes you have to lie, cheat, and steal to take care of your patient. And I believe that and still believe that today, unfortunately, with battling insurance companies and all that. Sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to get your patient taken care of.
And then have you been watching the new pit season? And if so, do you feel like that is kind of how it was when you were in training? If you went on the ER rotation, do you think that it's a good representation of what it's like in the emergency room?
So we watched the entire first season, and we've talked about it a bunch of times on the podcast. It's definitely been a theme on our podcast. We've had a few episodes on the pit. So and I watched the first two or three of this season. But the reality for me is that I don't need to watch it. I don't feel I really like Noah Wyle a lot, and I think they do an amazing job. But it's like I've lived that and been there, and I'm sure Lauren and I are going to review it again. So I have a feeling and have another pit episode. So I'm sure I'm going to watch more episodes. But unless it's for homework, I don't feel the need to watch it. But yes, interestingly, we talked about on the podcast the first two episodes of the new season. I almost felt like they stole my identity a little bit. They found me, found my stories, and stole them, because there was that episode where they opened up the patient's chest in the emergency room to try to do CPR and revive that patient. I had that exact experience at Kings County Hospital, where I was the one opening up, cracking that patient's chest, putting some suture into the heart because the patient had been stabbed, then putting the little baby paddles on the heart, and then squeezing the heart, and then we wheel. So it almost felt like, hey, I did that. And then the same thing with the patient with who had the cast on, who when they took it off had maggots all over their arm. I had that multiple times. I still remember the story where, and we recently talked about it on the podcast. I had this grandpa kind of guy came in to the ER, who first we were talking, and I remember him saying, yeah, my grandson was playing by my feet, and he said, Grandpa, what are these things crawling around your foot? And so he took off the bandage, and sure enough, he had a gangrenous foot from bad diabetes, and in and around the gangrene, he was infested with maggots, and eventually we had to amputate his foot and everything. But it almost seemed like, so when I saw that, I said to Bernice, I'm like, oh, that guy's gonna have maggots under his cast for sure. So it was a no-brainer. We haven't seen other episodes. I hear there's a lot of good stuff though, but I haven't watched any other. What, are you watching it?
Yeah, I'm watching it, but I've been stalled a little bit with exams and everything. But
Yeah.
I watched like the first two episodes, I think, of the second season, and I that maggot scene was crazy. That's kind of funny that it's a little bit like deja vu for you in a way to see.
And it's
Um,
and it's intense. The other thing I feel like is they're just busy trying to like shock and awe you this season. They're doing a great job. I don't feel, and I know people love it. And again, I love Noah Wyle. I'm waiting for them to call me to have me help them with writing and ideas. Interestingly, one of the women who was an extra on it last season, who now I think has speaking parts as one of the nurses, is actually a nurse at the hospital who I'm friendly with, who's been a guest on the podcast, Ambar Martinez, and she's great. So it's kind of really cool, talking to her, and she's having a great time on the show.
wait, so she works at Cedar Sinai?
Yeah, she's an ER nurse there. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
that's really cool.
yeah.
And so I know that you were on your own show in the past. What was that like filming when you're, interacting and like doing your own job, but you're being filmed? Did that add some pressure? And was it like awkward uh, doing that?
Yeah. So I was on the show Take My Tumor, which unfortunately only lasted one season. It was a TLC show. The same people who did Dr. Pimple Popper did produce this show. And they found me through my podcast, Gross Anatomy Podcast. The story is the producer of the show told his assistant, find me the Gross Anatomy guy. And so they found me, it was definitely weird and awkward a little bit. Luckily, because of the podcast, and because of my social media, I'm kind of, to some degree, used to being in front of the camera, which was helpful. But the funny thing is it's, you would do a take or something like that where I go and talk to the patient or talk to the patient's family, and the patient's family would start staring at the camera, and you weren't allowed to stare at the camera. So they would say, Dr. Cohen, could we do that again? So that would be cool. I'd have to redo the whole so that was kind of a strange thing, having to redo these real conversations about surgery went okay. So that was a kind of bizarre situation. But otherwise, the only other fun, weird thing about it is I was really excited to have them film me in the OR, to see me in my element in the OR. And one of the things that I love in the OR is listening to music, whether it's Sinatra or 80s new wave or other things too, but so that I could either just hear it or potentially sing along with it. So guess what? On a TV show, they can't play any music. You know why? Because they don't get the copyright permission for those songs. And if they wind up filming that and they don't have, then they can't use it. So we had no music in the OR, which was kind of a bummer, not being able to operate with music. When they stopped filming, we would turn on the music, but I kind of was really disappointed about that. I didn't realize that until we got going. They're like, "Yeah, Dr. Cohen, you can't listen to music because otherwise we can't use the footage." So that was an interesting learning lesson for me.
Yeah, it is always funny for me to hear like that a lot of the surgeons will be playing music in the operating room and sometimes like have like specific playlists for surgery.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.